The world you know is built on half-truths, illusions carefully arranged to keep you comfortable, obedient, unafraid. But what I'm about to reveal is a darkness that was never meant to see the light, a shadow so deep it could swallow the history you thought was safe. In 1908, in the quiet stretches of Leaport, Indiana, a farmhouse burned to the ground. Smoke still curled from its walls when investigators made a discovery that would haunt a nation. Over 40 bodies buried in shallow graves, their limbs severed with the precision of a surgeon, skulls crushed beneath deliberate, heavy blows. These weren't victims of random violence. They were men who had answered an ad promising wealth, comfort, and the companionship of a woman named Belle Gunness, the widow who promised marriage and delivered death. Imagine the audacity required to turn human life into profit with such cold calculation. To the world, Belle was the embodiment of the American dream, a widow running a prosperous farm, raising children, managing her household with apparent grace. But beneath that facade lay a mechanism of control, manipulation, and murder so meticulous that it evaded detection for over a decade. She learned early how to exploit human trust. A smile here, a kind word there, a handwritten advertisement that read like salvation to lonely hearts hungry for love and opportunity. And yet, each man who walked onto her property became part of a ledger only she could read. Each life ended not in accident, but in orchestration. Insurance payouts, farm expansion, silence. Her victims came from every walk of life: immigrants seeking fortune, businessmen lured by charm, drifters hoping for stability, all enticed by the same promise: marriage, prosperity, safety, and all swallowed by a system so methodical it resembled a dark symphony, each note measured, each movement executed without hesitation. She was more than a killer. She was a master manipulator, a force that twisted opportunity into horror. Her farmhouse, her land, her family, everything became part of her instrument. Even the children, who learned early the unspoken rules of survival under her roof, were witnesses to a choreography of death too precise for words. And yet, the most disturbing revelation came not from the bodies, but from her absence. Among the ruins, the investigators found a headless corpse, 5 inches too short, 50 pounds too light to be Belle herself. She had vanished, and with her disappearance, a question lingered, a question that would turn her story from murder into legend. How does someone so meticulously cruel, so monstrously intelligent, simply disappear from the grasp of justice and society alike? Tonight, we descend into the life of Belle Gunness, into the shadows of a mind that weaponized love, trust, and ambition. You are about to see how a woman turned the American dream into an instrument of death, and why the echoes of her crimes still whisper to us from the past. Before she became a name whispered with fear, before the farm, the graves, the disappearances, she was Brynhild, a girl born in the remote village of Selbu, Norway, a place where survival was a daily ritual and hope was measured in handfuls of grain and scraps of firewood. At 21, she boarded a crowded ship bound for America, leaving everything she knew behind: steerage, crowded cabins, the stench of the ocean, the hopeful faces of other immigrants who believed that the new world held promise, prosperity, and freedom. But Brynhild carried something else with her, a hunger that went beyond opportunity, something sharper, something she would soon learn to wield like a scalpel. She arrived at Castle Garden, stepping onto American soil with nothing but a single suitcase and an uncanny instinct for survival. She entered the homes of Chicago's wealthy as a domestic servant, observing, listening, recording the subtle ways people could be manipulated, how trust could be earned with a gesture, how fear could be disguised beneath charm, how greed could be turned into a weapon. She learned the language of money, of desire, of influence, and then, with surgical precision, she shed her old identity. Brynhild became Belle, not just a name, but a persona, a carefully crafted mask designed to deceive, seduce, and dominate. Marriage came quickly. Mads Dipp Anton Sørensen, a Norwegian immigrant like herself, offered companionship, stability, a shared dream of success. Together, they opened a confectionery store in Chicago. On the surface, their life was idyllic, sweet treats, warm smiles, a modest success in a city of millions. But beneath it, Belle's mind was already calculating. Fires broke out in convenient places, the store, their home, each blaze leaving behind not destruction, but opportunity. Insurance money flowed in, a steady river of capital flowing into her control. Then came the children, and with them, tragedy masked as misfortune. 2 foster children died suddenly. Doctors blamed colitis, but anyone who looks closely now can see the pattern, the timing, the symptoms, the deaths always benefiting Belle financially. The world saw accidents. Belle saw leverage. Her first husband died with uncanny timing. One day alone, overlapping 2 life insurance policies. The payout, massive, life-altering, hers. She did not mourn. She adjusted. She reinvented. By 1901, she had a new identity in a new place. A prosperous widow, a farm owner, a woman beyond reproach. To the neighbors, she was proof of the American dream. To the victims who would soon appear on her doorstep, she was salvation incarnate. And yet, beneath the white painted walls of her farmhouse, something ancient, predatory, and calculated had taken root, a mind that would learn to turn trust, desire, and human weakness into tools for murder. Every smile, every advertisement, every gesture of kindness was a step deeper into the machinery of control she had created. And as she stood on the threshold of her new life, ready to charm, seduce, and ultimately destroy, the stage was set for a series of murders that would shock a nation, not because of violence alone, but because of the intelligence and cunning behind it. Belle Gunness was not born evil, she had learned it, perfected it, and made it unstoppable. By 1901, Belle had arrived in Leaport, Indiana, a town that believed in the promise of progress, industry, and honest labor. To anyone passing by, the white-painted farmhouse with green shutters, the well-tended fields, and the carefully ordered pig pens was the image of success. It radiated stability, prosperity, and an almost maternal domesticity. But this surface was a trap, a carefully constructed lure. Every fence, every gate, every path leading to the house had been placed with intention. Isolation was her weapon, privacy her ally, and the men who would answer her advertisements would unknowingly walk straight into a system designed to consume them. The farm itself was an extension of Belle's mind. 2 stories of brick, modern plumbing, a telephone line, luxuries rare in rural Indiana. The barn and hog pens were not only functional, they were staging grounds for control. Rooms were arranged to hide movement, cellars to conceal secrets, basements to store truths no one should ever see. The children, quiet and reserved, mirrored the eerie calm of the household. Neighbors would glimpse them at school or in passing and see only polite, well-dressed children. But those who looked too closely could sense a tension in their presence, an unspoken understanding of the darkness lurking behind the walls they called home. Belle's method was deliberate. She did not strike in haste. She studied the men who answered her ads, learning their habits, fears, and weaknesses. Loneliness, greed, ambition. She dissected them as if peeling away layers of skin, exposing what lay underneath. And then she acted, but never without planning. The arrivals were staged. A smile, a warm meal, an invitation to settle on the farm and build a life. Every gesture was calculated to lower suspicion, to create a sense of inevitability, as though their deaths were somehow part of their own design. She weaponized trust, understanding that the human mind often seeks patterns, predictability, comfort. She became the pattern, the comfort, the inevitability. By the time her victims understood the danger, it was already too late. And yet, the farm's outward appearance never betrayed her intentions. Traders, townspeople, even local authorities were drawn to her prosperity. They marveled at the productivity of her pig pens, the efficiency of her barn, the success of her farm market dealings. No one suspected that beneath this idyllic exterior lay an operation that turned human desire into a mechanism of death. Even the small details were her allies. Pathways cleared to guide visitors exactly where she wanted, doors positioned to isolate, rooms arranged to ensure she maintained control. She had learned from her past. Human behavior could be predicted, exploited, and ultimately destroyed without leaving a trace provided you understood the rules, and she understood them better than anyone. The stage was set, the farm itself a character in the drama of murder, and the first wave of men were about to arrive, each drawn by a promise, each stepping unknowingly into a calculated nightmare. The first men arrived as strangers, their hearts filled with hope, ambition, and longing. They had answered her advertisement promises of companionship, a comfortable home, the chance to share in Belle's prosperous farm. And Belle? She greeted them with warmth, charm, and a presence that disarmed every suspicion. There was no haste in her approach, no visible threat. She was the perfect hostess, a widow burdened by loneliness, welcoming men who sought opportunity. But beneath every smile and gentle word, calculations simmered. Every gesture, every meal, every conversation was a test, a measure of how easily she could bend another human will to her own. She learned quickly who could be manipulated with flattery, who could be subdued with fear, and who required more subtle persuasion. Her farm was a stage, each room, each hallway, each dark corner carefully designed to control behavior. A misplaced step could isolate a man. A sudden invitation to the cellar could plant unease. Her children, eerily silent observers, absorbed the orchestration, learning early the unspoken rules. Obedience, discretion, and the subtle ways power could be enforced without words. Every act of murder was preceded by psychological domination, a slow unraveling that left her victims compliant, vulnerable, and ultimately powerless. When the killings began, they were not random. They were ritualized. Each death followed a pattern, a choreography she refined over time. Limbs severed, skulls crushed, bodies buried in shallow graves, acts performed with mechanical precision, almost clinical in nature. Yet she ensured that no two deaths were identical, maintaining the illusion of chance and tragedy. It was this blend of method and improvisation that kept suspicion at bay and allowed her to continue for years without detection. The local authorities, neighbors, even traveling salesmen would remark on her diligence and charm, oblivious to the dark symphony of death unfolding just beyond the surface. Belle's power lay not only in her ability to kill but in her mastery of perception. She curated her image meticulously. The grieving widow, the hard-working farmer, the attentive mother. Each persona served to distract, to soothe, to convince the world that nothing sinister could dwell behind her doors. And yet, the truth was undeniable. She controlled life and death with a precision most could scarcely imagine. Every man who stepped onto her farm became a pawn in her strategy, a lesson in human vulnerability, a testament to her capacity for cold calculation. And as her reputation as a prosperous, clever widow grew, so too did the audacity of her crimes. She had learned the ultimate secret of power, to conceal control beneath the guise of benevolence, to make manipulation invisible, to turn desire into a weapon. The farm became both trap and laboratory, and her victims were unaware participants in a deadly experiment designed by a mind that understood human nature better than any law, any neighbor, any authority could. To truly understand Belle Gunness, you must grasp the darkness not just of her actions, but of her mind. She did not simply kill. She orchestrated, manipulated, and dominated. Each man who stepped onto her farm became a subject in an invisible experiment, a demonstration of how desire, trust, and ambition could be weaponized. She studied them as a predator studies prey, listening to tone, observing posture, noting hesitation or overconfidence. A nervous glance, a too eager smile, a lingering hesitation each revealed exactly how they could be controlled. She understood human weakness as others understand numbers. Precise, predictable, exploitable. Her charm was the first layer of the trap. Belle was mesmerizing, the perfect widow of small-town legend, capable of drawing a man into a sense of security that felt almost sacred. Then came the subtle manipulations. Meals seasoned with attention, conversations shaped to reveal confidences, small favors that created a sense of obligation. She made her victims believe they were in control, that their choices mattered, even as every step was guided by her invisible hand. By the time fear or suspicion arose, it was too late. The trap had already closed, the die cast, the design complete. Belle's control extended beyond the immediate. She understood that terror could be administered psychologically before the physical act of murder. Isolation was her tool. She kept men away from the eyes of the world, often enticing them to stay on the farm overnight, ensuring no witnesses, no interruptions, no second thoughts. Her children, silent sentinels, reinforced the illusion of normalcy. Their quiet presence an unsettling reminder that life continued around acts of unimaginable horror. Each victim, alone and vulnerable, became increasingly reliant on her guidance, her instruction, her promises. The psychological tension mounted, twisting hope into dependence, and dependence into a quiet, resigned terror. And then came the act itself. Some died quickly, violently, methodically. Others endured a longer, more torturous process, an ordeal Belle had perfected over years of practice. The method mattered less than the principle. Control from start to finish, dominance absolute. Bodies were disposed of with the same cold logic she applied to every detail of her life. Graves were shallow but concealed. Evidence was minimal. The fire she had practiced with before the candy store, the Chicago home, became a tool for the farm when needed. Nothing was accidental. Every move was calculated. Every outcome preordained. By the time authorities finally discovered her crimes, Belle had been at work for over a decade, shaping her world into a carefully orchestrated stage where she held absolute power. Her victims were not random. They were instruments in a symphony of manipulation and death, each note played to reinforce the central truth. Belle Gunness controlled life itself, and few, if any, could escape the gravity of her design. Halfway through this descent into shadow, I want you to commit to this truth. In the comments below, type, "I see the darkness" twice. Do it now. Anchor yourself in awareness. This is not just engagement, it is a ritual of recognition, a way to confront the hidden forces that operate around you. Once you acknowledge the darkness, you cannot unsee it. Belle Gunness was no ordinary criminal. She understood the machinery of society, the ways law, commerce, and human trust could be manipulated to serve her purposes. Insurance became her instrument, a mechanism through which tragedy was converted into profit. Fires, illnesses, accidental deaths each became a calculated step in her plan. She did not kill recklessly. She killed with intention, ensuring that every death brought her wealth, reinforced her image, and left no trace linking her to the crime. To the world, she was the grieving widow, the hardworking farmer, the mother of well-behaved children. Behind closed doors, she was the architect of horror. Her audacity escalated with each success. Shallow graves, carefully measured, barely concealed, became her standard method. Yet even in burial, she experimented. How far could she push concealment before suspicion arose? Could the earth itself hide the patterns of her killings? Each male visitor to her farm was a test subject, each death a lesson in human predictability and institutional blind spots. By the time authorities began to take notice, she had become a ghost in her own home, a shadow slipping through the cracks of reality, leaving destruction only where she chose. What made Belle terrifying was not just her capacity for murder, but her mastery of narrative. She controlled perception as carefully as she controlled life and death. To the neighbors, she was respectable, industrious, and honest. To her children, she was both protector and silent enforcer, teaching obedience without uttering threats, instilling fear through subtle presence and whispered authority. To the men who answered her ads, she was salvation, a guide into prosperity and comfort. And yet, all of them unknowingly stepped into a world of domination and control, a world where their fate had already been decided. Even the farm itself was a partner in her crimes. Hidden cellars, isolated pathways, and cleverly arranged buildings allowed her to move freely while maintaining complete control. The pigs, the barns, the fences, everything reinforced the illusion of normalcy while masking the instruments of death. She had learned from experience that power is silent, subtle, and invisible. The world will only see what you allow it to see. Belle exploited that principle to perfection, and still her ambition grew. She no longer simply waited for men to arrive. She cultivated circumstances to attract them, refining her advertisements, adjusting her persona, and experimenting with human desire. Each step became more precise, more audacious, more dangerous. The consequences were unimaginable to anyone who crossed her path. Yet for Belle, each risk was just another calculation, another proof of mastery, another demonstration of the cold, absolute control she could wield over life, death, and human perception. The first confirmed murders were the whispers that became a roar. The townspeople, who had only seen Belle as a widow, a diligent farmer, a woman who managed her children with quiet authority, began to notice odd patterns: men who arrived and never left, children who seemed burdened by unseen knowledge, and an uncanny sequence of fires and deaths that always seemed to benefit Belle financially. Fear began to stir in subtle ways. A neighbor avoiding her path, a shopkeeper hesitating when her name was mentioned, the faint but persistent sense that beneath her calm exterior, something lethal was unfolding. The investigators who arrived at her farm in 1908 stepped into a nightmare that was decades in the making. Shallow graves, meticulously arranged yet grotesque in their purpose, revealed the magnitude of her cruelty. Limbs severed with a precision that suggested training, skulls crushed with premeditation. These were not frenzied acts of passion, but the product of a mind that had studied, planned, and executed murder as methodically as one might tend livestock. Over 40 men had entered her life, and each had been removed in accordance with a hidden, horrifying logic. What set Belle apart from other killers was her ability to mask intent with familiarity. She was a widow, a mother, a landowner. People trusted her. Men arrived at her door because she promised prosperity, companionship, and care. And yet, the very qualities that drew them in the warmth, the charm, the apparent vulnerability were precisely the tools she used to manipulate, control, and ultimately destroy. She understood human instinct, desire, and fear, and she wielded them like instruments in a symphony of death. Even as the first evidence was uncovered, the mystery deepened. The headless corpse found in her basement was 5 inches too short, 50 pounds too light to be Belle herself. She had vanished into the shadow of her own crimes, leaving nothing but a trail of bodies, burned structures, and unanswered questions. The audacity of her escape was as chilling as the murders themselves, proof of her intelligence, her adaptability, and her absolute mastery over the perception of those around her. And so, Belle's story evolved from tragedy to legend, from crime to myth. She became more than a murderer. She became a symbol of unseen power, of the dark possibilities that lie beneath human civility. Her life proved a terrifying truth, that some minds are capable of orchestrating horrors with the precision of an artist, that trust can be weaponized, that desire can be exploited, and that for those who underestimate the darkness, survival is never guaranteed. The world had glimpsed her shadow, and for those who understood its magnitude, nothing would ever feel safe again.
Belle Gunness vanished.
Not in panic, not in haste, but with the quiet precision of a predator slipping from a trap before the prey even realizes the danger. The headless corpse in her basement was discovered, but it was not her. Investigators had assumed, for a fleeting moment, that the nightmare had ended. Yet the truth remained elusive. Belle had disappeared into the void, leaving behind only the skeletal remnants of her victims and the growing sense that she was untouchable. Her vanishing was not chaos, it was design. A final assertion of control over life, death, and justice itself. Theories about her fate spread like wildfire. Some believed she had fled to South America, reinventing herself yet again under a new identity. Others whispered that she had been killed elsewhere, her body destroyed beyond recognition, leaving the world to wonder whether the horror had truly ended. Some even suggested the impossible, that Belle remained in Indiana, hidden in plain sight, watching as the world struggled to comprehend her power, her audacity, her mastery over circumstance. The uncertainty amplified her legend, transforming her from a murderer into a force, something almost mythic, something that could not be contained by conventional understanding. What makes Belle's disappearance terrifying is not simply that she vanished, but that it was the logical extension of her life's work. She had always manipulated perception, exploited desire, and weaponized trust. Why would she not extend those same skills to her own survival? Every calculated act, every carefully concealed murder, every fire and insurance claim, all of it led to this moment, the ultimate assertion of control. She dictated not only who lived and died, but whether the world could even find her. And in that, she succeeded beyond measure. Even today, the disappearance raises uncomfortable questions. How many of us walk through life assuming control is linear, that actions have predictable consequences, that justice is inevitable? Belle's story reminds us that power can operate in ways most cannot see, that audacity, intelligence, and mastery over human behavior can bend reality to one's will, that some forces are capable of vanishing from sight while leaving devastation behind. The lessons are subtle, but brutal. Trust is fragile, appearances are deceiving, and human desire is a tool that can be manipulated to lethal effect. And so, her legend endures. The farm, the graves, the missing body, they are all fragments of a truth too dark to ignore. That Belle Gunness mastered the ultimate game, not merely of murder, but of life itself. She left a world of questions in her wake, a world where the line between myth and reality dissolves, where the shadows are alive, and where the observer must confront a chilling possibility that someone, somewhere, could control everything and leave you powerless without ever being caught. Belle Gunness did not rely on brute force alone. She understood the mind, the subtle ways fear, desire, and hope could be twisted to serve her design. Every man who arrived at her farm entered a carefully constructed reality, one where his own choices seemed to guide him towards safety and prosperity. In truth, he was being led like a pawn, each step calculated, each decision anticipated, each hesitation observed and recorded. The mind is a fragile instrument, and Belle played it like a virtuoso, turning trust into obedience, comfort into dependence, and ambition into vulnerability. Isolation was her primary tool. Away from the eyes of neighbors and authority, men were cut off from the stabilizing influences of the outside world. The farm became a labyrinth of subtle pressures, an innocuous hallway that led to a basement, a quiet glance from a child that unsettled, a suggestion of urgency in her tone. Each detail reinforced the notion that Belle's control was absolute. Every act, every word, every gesture drew her victims deeper into a web of compliance they barely realized existed. Resistance became psychologically exhausting, surrender inevitable. Her mastery extended to observation. She could read hesitation, arrogance, greed, or fear within moments of meeting someone. A nervous laugh, a shift of weight, the blink of an eye, these were data points, each one shaping the method and timing of their demise. Belle's psychological manipulation was precise, almost scientific. She created a sense of intimacy, of shared purpose, of trust, and then used that trust as a leash. She allowed small victories, illusions of influence, to make men complicit in their own downfall. By the time she struck, they had already accepted, in some subtle way, that they were under her authority. Even her household contributed to this system of terror. The children, quiet and watchful, served as silent enforcers, their presence a reminder that life on the farm operated under unspoken rules. The buildings themselves were instruments, cellars for confinement, rooms arranged to isolate, paths designed to prevent escape. Belle's genius was in her ability to fuse environment, psychology, and social perception into a single, terrifying machine. Each victim became a participant in a drama they could not understand, trapped by the very hopes and desires that had drawn them in. What makes Belle's story enduringly terrifying is that it is not just about murder, it is about mastery. She demonstrated the power of intellect over instinct, manipulation over force, and perception over reality. And for those who have walked through history alongside her, the lesson is inescapable. Understanding human nature is the ultimate weapon. She did not simply kill her victims. She controlled them, bent them, made them complicit, and left behind a testament to the dark potential that resides in the mind that refuses to be bound by morality, law, or empathy. When the authorities finally descended on Belle Gunness' farm, the horror they uncovered was beyond comprehension. Shallow graves, limbs severed, skulls crushed 40 bodies or more, each a testament to her meticulous orchestration. The farmhouse, still intact in parts, offered no immediate clues to her disappearance. It was as if the very land had conspired with her, hiding evidence while amplifying the illusion of normalcy. The town of Leaport, previously oblivious to the shadow lurking in its midst, was thrust into terror and disbelief. How could such evil exist behind a facade so meticulously crafted? Investigators struggled to reconcile the ordinary with the monstrous. Belle's image as a diligent widow, a mother, a prosperous farmer, was irreconcilable with the carnage beneath her floors. Every object, every room, every trace of her presence seemed to mock conventional understanding of morality and justice. How could one mind plan so many deaths, conceal them with such precision, and vanish without a trace? The more authorities examined, the more it became clear. Belle had engineered not just murders, but perception itself. She had manipulated society into believing she was harmless, while constructing an empire of death. Public reaction was a mix of fascination and fear. Newspapers sensationalized the story, yet even the journalists struggled to capture the full scope of her audacity. Some wondered if she had perished in the basement fire. Others whispered that she had fled, reinvented herself, and was perhaps living undetected somewhere, free and untouchable. Her legend blurred the line between fact and myth, creating a darkness that refused to be fully illuminated. Belle Gunness had become more than a killer. She had become a symbol of the terrifying possibilities that lie hidden within human cunning, audacity, and control. What struck the investigators most was the order, the planning, the intelligence behind each act. This was not a crime of passion, not the work of a mind unhinged. It was calculated, methodical, and terrifyingly logical. Each fire, each insurance claim, each disappearance had been rehearsed, timed, and executed with precision. Belle had weaponized human desire, hope, and trust to construct her empire. Every man who walked through her doors had been assessed, manipulated, and disposed of in a manner that reinforced the illusion of normalcy outside her walls. And so, even in her absence, Belle continued to command attention. She demonstrated that true power lies in subtlety, in perception, in shaping the world to your will without ever being caught. She left behind a haunting lesson. Evil does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it thrives in quiet, in precision, in the ability to bend trust, desire, and hope to its purpose. Belle Gunness vanished, but her shadow remained a reminder that the world can be meticulously controlled by a mind willing to disregard all morality. Belle Gunness became more than a criminal. She became a legend, a cautionary symbol of power, cunning, and the darkness that can hide behind charm and normalcy. Newspapers, local gossip, and eventually historians treated her story like a puzzle and enigma that seemed too precise, too audacious, too intelligent to be the work of a single person. And that is exactly the point. Her crimes were not just acts of violence, but demonstrations of control. She taught the world, silently and horrifically, that mastery over others does not require brute force. It requires calculation, subtlety, and an intimate understanding of desire and fear. The myth of Belle Gunness spread quickly, feeding on the public's fascination with forbidden knowledge and the macabre. She became a symbol of hidden manipulation, a figure who could wield trust, seduction, and circumstance like tools to bend reality. Each retelling emphasized her intelligence, her audacity, her ability to vanish without a trace. In the cultural imagination, she was no longer just a murderer, she was an archetype, the dark mirror to every desire for power, influence, and control that men quietly harbor. She became the embodiment of a terrifying truth. The most dangerous forces are not obvious, not visible, not loud. They are silent, patient, and methodical. And yet, the fascination is not merely historical. Belle's story resonates because it exposes something deeply human. The susceptibility to manipulation, the readiness to trust appearances, the willingness to believe in promises of prosperity and companionship. Each man who fell victim to her schemes was a mirror for the rest of us. Her life and crimes reveal the fragility of perception, the vulnerability of hope, and the ease with which ambition and desire can be weaponized against the self. We see ourselves in the men who answered her ads, trusting, hopeful, and unprepared for the predator disguised as opportunity. In this sense, Belle Gunness transcends history. She becomes a study in hidden power, a lens through which to examine human psychology and societal blind spots. Her farm, her advertisements, her persona, they are all lessons in the invisible mechanisms that shape behavior, perception, and belief. She manipulated the world around her with the quiet precision of a master strategist, leaving devastation and awe in equal measure. Her myth persists because it is instructive. It warns, it fascinates, it seduces, and it reminds us that some minds are capable of shaping reality itself without ever being fully seen. And now, as you continue to descend with me, ask yourself, how many Belle Gunnesses exist in history today, hiding in plain sight, manipulating perception, bending trust, and controlling outcomes while the world sleeps? The awareness of that possibility changes how you perceive everything. Your understanding of trust, power, and danger will never be the same. Belle Gunness did more than exploit men. She exploited the systems they relied upon. Law enforcement, insurance companies, neighbors, even the very institutions meant to protect society, they were all tools in her design. Each fire, each death, each disappearance was calculated to exploit loopholes, delays, and assumptions. She understood human systems as well as she understood human psychology. She knew how to mask patterns, how to manipulate perception, and how to make authority look incompetent without ever touching it directly. She turned society itself into an accomplice, a silent partner in her crimes. Consider the insurance claims, which were her first layer of invisibility. Fires destroyed homes, sudden deaths of children provided payouts, and life insurance policies were timed to perfection. Every transaction followed a logic that was invisible to most, but perfectly coherent in her mind. She understood incentives, motivations, and procedures, how greed, bureaucracy, and human oversight could be leveraged as tools of survival. Belle transformed misfortune into wealth, tragedy into opportunity, and suspicion into nothing more than whispers in the wind. In doing so, she demonstrated an uncomfortable truth. Systems designed to protect are often exploitable by those clever enough to study them. Even the community played a role in her continued dominance. Neighbors trusted her diligence, respected her work ethic, and marveled at her apparent resilience in the face of misfortune. They never questioned her motives, never saw the slow accumulation of horror beneath the surface. People are conditioned to see what they expect, to believe what they are told, to interpret reality through the lens of social norms. Belle weaponized that conditioning. She understood that control is most effective when it is invisible, when fear and trust operate simultaneously in the minds of the unwitting. Her farm was more than a crime scene, it was a laboratory for human behavior. Men arrived, guided by hope. Children grew, observing compliance and fear. The land itself reinforced the illusion of security while hiding unspeakable acts. Belle's mastery lay in the combination of environment, psychology, and institutional blindness. Each layer was a shield, a camouflage, a mechanism to ensure that power remained in her hands. She demonstrated that dominance is not brute. It is subtle, calculated, and invisible. The legacy of Belle Gunness forces us to confront uncomfortable realities. How easily trust can be manipulated, how social and institutional systems can be exploited, and how intelligence coupled with audacity can evade detection for years. She left behind more than corpses, she left a blueprint of control, a study in dominance, and a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities in human nature that still exist today. Belle Gunness became a ghost in history long before she physically disappeared. Every retelling of her story carried fragments of truth mixed with speculation, rumor, and imagination. Some claimed she died in the fire on her farm. Others insisted she fled the country, reinvented herself, and continued her work elsewhere. Each account was compelling, each plausible, and each reinforced the sense of awe and terror surrounding her name. The contradictions themselves became part of her power, proof that reality could bend when intelligence, audacity, and control were applied with precision. Her legend evolved into something almost mythic. To some, she was a figure of pure evil, a predator who outsmarted everyone around her. To others, she was a master strategist, a mind so brilliant it could evade capture indefinitely. The uncertainty of her fate amplified the terror of her crimes. The headless corpse discovered in the basement was merely a symbol, a reminder that she could vanish while leaving devastation in her wake. It was as if Belle had transcended mortality, existing not just in flesh and blood, but in the collective consciousness of those who feared her cunning. What is most haunting about Belle Gunness is the duality she embodied. She was mother and murderer, widow and predator, nurturer and destroyer. To the casual observer, she was respectable, industrious, and unremarkable. To those she ensnared, she was absolute control incarnate, a mind that anticipated every action, every thought, every weakness. In that duality lies a lesson that transcends history. Power can be invisible, danger can wear the guise of familiarity, and the most terrifying figures are those who manipulate perception as skillfully as reality itself. Her name became shorthand for caution, for hidden menace, for the terrifying potential of intelligence without morality. Authors, journalists, and folklorists perpetuated her story, each iteration emphasizing her cunning, her audacity, and her ability to vanish. She became a template for the darkly intelligent female archetype, a figure who wielded control through psychological mastery rather than brute force. And in that archetype, she remains timeless, an eternal reminder of the vulnerabilities in human trust and perception. The ultimate horror is not simply in her actions, but in the knowledge that she exploited patterns in human behavior that are universal, enduring, and rarely acknowledged. She teaches that survival, power, and dominance are often won through subtlety, foresight, and psychological precision. Belle Gunness is gone, yet her methods, her audacity, and her legend persist. And those who study her story are forced to confront a chilling truth. The capacity for manipulation, control, and exploitation is closer to home than we dare admit. The story of Belle Gunness does not end with the last grave, the charred farmhouse, or even the mystery of her disappearance. Her legacy reverberates into the modern world, not as legend alone, but as a template for manipulation, control, and psychological domination. The same principles she wielded: observation, isolation, exploitation of desire, and subtle coercion are visible in corporate boardrooms, digital landscapes, and social systems where trust and perception are continuously leveraged for gain. She was, in essence, a pioneer of influence, a mind that understood the mechanics of power long before they were theorized or documented. Consider the algorithms of today's social networks, the targeted marketing strategies, the psychological nudges embedded in daily life. They operate on the same basic principles Belle mastered intuitively. Study behavior, anticipate reactions, manipulate perception, and exploit desire. The machinery has changed, the medium is digital rather than physical, but the architecture remains the same. And just as Belle created the perfect environment on her farm to control her victims, the modern world constructs digital farms of data, where attention, desire, and trust are harvested with precision. Her methods also resonate in the study of psychological control and human behavior. Isolation, dependency, and subtle manipulation, the tactics she used are mirrored in systems designed to maintain obedience, loyalty, or consumer engagement. She understood that people are most vulnerable when they believe they are in control, that fear and hope can be intertwined to guide decisions, and that compliance can be earned without violence if the architecture of influence is perfect. Her crimes, horrifying as they were, offer a blueprint for understanding how human behavior can be shaped and exploited invisibly, systematically, and devastatingly. Even culturally, Belle's influence lingers. True crime fascination, folklore, urban legends, they are not just entertainment. They are reflections of the human mind's recognition of hidden power, manipulation, and the dark possibilities that lie behind ordinary facades. Her story is instructive, a warning that mastery over perception and behavior is a form of ultimate power. And it forces us to ask, how many Belle Gunnesses exist today, operating within modern systems, shaping outcomes, and exploiting desire, trust, and perception while remaining invisible? As you absorb this, consider the mechanisms at play not just in history, but in your own life. Where are the forces guiding you, nudging your choices, influencing your desires? Who is pulling strings you cannot see, and what patterns have you ignored? Recognition is the first step toward mastery. Comment, I see the darkness twice below to anchor your awareness, acknowledge the invisible currents shaping the world, and take the first step into a deeper understanding of power and control. Now, at the edge of this descent, you must confront the ultimate truth. Belle Gunness is not merely a historical figure. She is a lens, a dark doctrine, a blueprint for understanding the hidden forces that govern human behavior, desire, and trust. Her power was not in brute force, not in chaos, but in mastery, the kind of mastery that bends perception, exploits hope, and manipulates outcomes without leaving a trace. And this is the lesson that endures. What she achieved with her farm, her victims, her disappearance, is happening every day in subtle ways all around you. Look closely at your world. The systems you trust, the people you admire, the structures you rely upon, none are immune to manipulation. Desire can be weaponized. Hope can be guided. Fear can be administered with precision. Belle's farm was a microcosm, a laboratory, and her methods are the universal principles of hidden control. She demonstrates that domination is most effective when invisible, influence most effective when unrecognized, and power most absolute when those around you believe they are free. Understanding this transforms perception. It awakens you to the reality that the line between victim and participant is razor thin, and sometimes invisible. Your awakening is personal. You have followed this descent not as a passive observer, but as someone who must now recognize the subtle currents shaping your life. You see the architecture of influence, the mechanisms of control, and the vulnerability of human nature. And once you see it, it cannot be unseen. You understand the delicate balance between awareness and ignorance, knowledge and power. Belle's story becomes your mirror, reflecting the shadows of manipulation that exist within institutions, relationships, and even within your own mind. The final seal is recognition. You now understand the doctrine of influence, the patterns of human behavior, and the silent forces that govern action and thought. This knowledge is dangerous, transformative, and irrevocable. It is a key to power and a warning of vulnerability. Belle Gunness, in life and in myth, has shown you that intelligence without morality, audacity without restraint, and perception without empathy can bend the world itself to one mind. And in this reflection, you are challenged to master your own perception, to see the hidden structures, to understand the depths of manipulation, and to step into the world forever altered by this knowledge. Do not forget, power is silent, influence is invisible, and mastery is earned through awareness. Belle Gunness is gone, yet she remains because the lessons she leaves are eternal. And now, having descended fully into this forbidden history, you are no longer merely a spectator. You are awakened, you are changed, and nothing will ever feel the same again. Belle Gunness vanished without a trace, but her methods of control and manipulation still haunt us today. Watch closely, comment, I see the darkness twice, and confront the invisible forces shaping the world around you. How much of life is really under your control?